First of all, let me commend you all on not being weather wimps. I know there are those who probably stayed home tonight, but those who came, those of you, I think you're in for a treat here. Actually, the weather did cost us a couple of panelists tonight. First, Rush Schrieffer was supposed to be here. He had a family issue that kept him away. Stuart Stevens his partner was going to take his place. He got snowed out, as did Elizabeth Wilner. We hope to have them back another time, but we still have a stellar panel. This is the argument for inviting a large panel, so that when the weather hits, you know you still have a great panel, and we do tonight, and they'll be introduced shortly. I'm excited about this particular segment because I spent 25 years of my life in this particular aspect of politics, making ads, media strategy, placing, how you place and deploy those ads. And it obviously is a critical juncture, a critical component of campaigns, even today as people's news gathering, information gathering outlets are more diverse. Television's still the nuclear weapon of politics. So this is a very critical discussion along the way in our 5-week review of the presidential race, and hopefully all of you will come away not only with a deeper understanding of what happened in that race, but also how these techniques are used. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our introducer. Tanvi Mago is a second-year student in the college. She's double majoring in political science and public policy with a minor in human rights. And she's been a fellows and events ambassador for the IOP. She's been helping Larry Grisolano this week. She's originally from Chicago but lives in Delhi, India, when not in school. Actively involved in the Model United Nations and works as a teaching assistant in a Southside elementary school. Last question. So, this isn't right. That's not the name of the school. I don't think. So I don't know how Tanvi finds time for all of this, but obviously a remarkable young woman. Let me introduce your introducer, Tanvi Mago.
Thank you so much. So good evening. As already said, my name is Tanvi Mago, and I'm a Fellows Ambassador and an Events Ambassador for the IOP. And I have the distinct privilege of introducing our panel and our guests this evening, and would like to thank all of you for joining us despite the terrible weather. So advertising is an integral part to any political campaign. Not only is it one of our primary avenues of communicating with citizens, but it is also a way for campaigns to use media to truly shape the discussion concerning candidates and the campaign narrative. It also serves as a crucial forum for continuous debate and dialogue between competing parties and leading up to election. Every panelist present tonight has had to deal with the retaliating to attack ads and the seemingly impossible task of creating a 30-second or 1-minute spot summarizing a candidate's viewpoints on an incredibly complex topic, such as the economy or healthcare. Tonight, we are going to hear from our distinguished panelists about ads, messaging, and media buying during the recent 2012 campaign. We will get to hear firsthand about the overarching media strategies employed during the campaign, along with details about creative execution and ad buying. We will hear about the role super PACs played in the previous election, and in addition, we will share and dissect a few key television commercials from the campaign that ended last November. We are very lucky to have one of the few of the most prominent advertising professionals from both parties, along with our exemplary campaign strategists this evening. I'm honored to introduce our esteemed speakers. Firstly, we are joined by Larry Grisolano. Larry Grisolano served as Director of Paid Media for the Obama for America campaign in 2012 and Director of Paid Media and Opinion Research in 2008. A partner of AKPD Message and Media, Larry has advised campaigns at every level during his 30-year career in Democratic Party politics. We are also joined by Jim Margolis. Jim Margolis is a partner at GMMB, where he's worked on behalf of candidates, foundations, government agencies, and corporate clients. He served as a senior advisor to President Obama's re-election campaign in 2012 and is currently the lead media consultant for a range of Democratic senators, including Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. We are also joined by Ashley O'Connor. Ashley O'Connor is a partner at Stevens & Schrieffer Group and served as an advertising director for the Romney campaign in 2012. In 2004, Ashley was director of ad productions and a member of the strategy team for the Bush and Cheney re-election campaign. And lastly, the moderator for this evening will be Jim Rutenberg. Jim Rutenberg is a national political correspondent for the New York Times, and during his career at the paper, he's covered both the 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns, as well as the White House, the media, and New York City Hall. Previously, he reported on television for the New York Observer and was a staff reporter for the New York Daily News. With that, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming our panelists, and have a good evening.
So, for me, this is very exciting because these are the guys who hide from my phone calls for most of the year. So this is going to be fun. No, and I've been told that a good way, since I'm generally probably feared by you guys, is to break the ice. It's, you know, it'd be cool for, I think, the audience, especially the students, but me as well, is how did you get into this racket, such as it is? I mean, political advertising, this is a surprisingly small club. I think it's the coolest job in politics in a way, because these guys are directing hundreds of millions of dollars. And I mean, look at Grizz. If you think that guy is controlling hundreds of millions of dollars, but hundreds of millions of dollars to really, and to turn people into products and sell them to the American people. And it's a tiny niche for how much power it has. So how did each of you, if you want to go through, how did you get here? Yeah, sure. You do it first, since I was picking on you.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks first of all for everyone braving the storm to come see us. It's a tribute to the interest in the community and the great programming that IOP's put together. So thank you. My own kind of journey to get involved in the political media business began. I grew up in Iowa, and I was a volunteer in high school where I knocked on doors. And I got involved in campaigns. And in Iowa, people really, at least at the time that I was coming up, people got involved in campaigns as field organizers. We were kind of more of an organizational state than a kind of a media state. But I kind of worked my way along and managed a race in 1990 for governor of Nebraska. We lost the primary election by 42 votes out of 300,000 cast. I ended up spending a couple of months there, with no pay, by the way, after the election, for a recount. But we ultimately were certified as having lost by that close margin. And, our media consultant in that campaign, took such pity on me for this difficult circumstance, that he, hired me and brought me to his, office in Chicago to begin working. And that was David Axelrod. And I've been working in and out of, projects with David, ever since. And that's how I got in the political media business.
My path is slightly different, and I went to Mount Holyoke College, and when Stuart Stevens, a Republican media strategist, called Mount Holyoke and said that he was looking to hire someone for an entry-level position at a Republican consulting firm, Mount Holyoke said, "Oh, we have a Republican we can send you." And I worked for Stuart right out of college, helping him just sort of assistant work in an edit room, and fell in love with advertising and fell in love with New York City. So at the end of the 96 cycle, Stuart and Russ had asked me to come back to D.C. to work in their D.C. office, and it's an off-year office manager. And I said, well, that sounds incredibly boring. So I stayed in New York and worked in advertising. I found a position at a production company and, really got to sort of sink my teeth into making ads with big budgets and ads that would be on the air for more than a week. And learned a ton, but after sitting in a meeting where they debated the color of the toaster for 3 hours, I decided I was better suited for political advertising. And I've been making ads ever since.
Well, Larry and I have decided tonight we're going to always have Ashley in between us. So there's somebody in front and then a rebut afterwards. And so you're going to see that consistently. Thanks, too, for inviting us to come. I've already had the highlight, as I've told everyone here. My mother, who died last year at 96, lived here in 1937, 38, 39. And they have an incredible archive. And within 5 minutes, they pulled her file as I was waiting here to show me her application, her picture, and all this stuff for people who were living in International House in 1936, 37, 38. So it's like pretty cool. She lived in room 645 and 742. I was doing political campaigns sort of from the time I was in high school. I'd like to tell you that there's like this great arc of how you do this stuff, but half the time it's luck. And I had gone off to work for a guy who was running for Congress who lost as I ran his field operation, only to come back 2 years later, just as I was graduating from college. And he won accidentally a congressional seat in Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, Michigan area. And so at 21, I went off to Washington as his chief of staff because he didn't know better. If I wore a blue suit, they thought I was a page and would tell me what floor on the elevator to push. And so it was kind of right place, right time, got to Washington. And over time sort of saw that, you wanted to change the world. You wanted to be involved. There were lots of ways to do that within government, but there was also a lot of people out there that you could maybe influence. And that could be in politics or it could be in causes. And I wanted to have a piece of that and sort of migrated over time to actually producing the spots and being involved that way instead of just working, within a campaign structure.
Yeah, Ashley, I didn't know you had some Madison Avenue experience, but this question's for all of you, but I'll start with you.
No, start with Larry.
I'm getting confused. You guys are marketing people and ideas. So, and as I've covered political advertising now since the 2004 campaign, and I remember these Madison Avenue types would always want to horn in on your guys' action, and they'll call me and say, these guys, their ads are schlock. They don't know what they're doing. And what you learn, the more you study this stuff, is the Madison Avenue guys' approach doesn't work as well as your guys' approach. You do things for a reason. But what do you think are the main differences between selling a blue toaster and selling Mitt Romney?
Having worked with a lot of these Madison Avenue types, and actually we brought some on to the campaign, both in 2004 for Bush and in 2012 for Romney. But, I think they're incredibly challenged by the kind of budgets that we have. And you look at political campaigns and it seems like there's so much spending, but that spending goes on the airwaves to get your message out. And that's sort of the most important part. And your ads are just that vehicle, and they need to be effective, most importantly. And I think that that's what Madison Avenue struggles with. They're for metaphors and broader emotion and letting things linger. And we're like special forces. It's effective. You've got to move people. You have to drive something. It's not like, it's not like Ivory and Dove attack each other. So you have, for us, it's always dynamic. You can put an ad up and you can think this is a great ad, and then something could shift. Either, in the campaign, current events, an ad that goes up against you. It's a very dynamic world. And I found that the folks in Madison Avenue just aren't used to working at that sort of speed.
Right. And do you guys concur with that? I mean, I guess you haven't had, have either of you had any Madison Avenue? We probably have some crossover, right?
Well, we do corporate work, but I think Ashley's right by and large. I mean, look, I always sort of bristle a little bit when people like Jim Rudenberg say things like, gee, how do you package this candidate and like a product? And candidates aren't products; they're people. And I think we're most effective when we try to find ways to authentically represent what it is that those people are trying to do, to look for that intersection between what a person stands for and what the public cares about and what voters care about and what target voters care about. And so as a candidate, I may care about a lot of different things, from, rainforests being destroyed in South America, but that may not be a voting decision issue. that may be something that's one of the issues that you know, if I had my opportunity, I'd try to change. But it's looking for that intersection between what people really are going to vote on and what I stand for, and we can give voice to.
Part of it goes to the way you posed the question, Jim, which is, I honestly, and I am here to antagonize the journalist on this issue.
Bring it.
I honestly don't think we are selling candidates like products. There is a difference between how you introduce a human being and his or her attributes, and motivations, and ideas and visions. It's just very different than most products that are sold, even complicated products with a lot of features like cars. You know, the dimensionality of a human being is very different. Second, just to expand for a moment on what Ashley said, the part of the dynamic of candidates attacking each other and that going back and forth is you're thinking 3 or 4 steps down the road when you do ad number 1. And you really don't have that in an environment where you're running kind of a low dribble of an ad for 6 months, and then the new campaign gets unveiled and the little line under the tide is a different color, right? And so there's just a very different kind of mindset. We have in both of our campaigns, we invited in other creative folks who don't come from the political community for thoughts and ideas and stuff, but to kind of bring the product mindset to the manner in which people want to be talked to about their government, about their elected officials. It's just very, very different.
Right. And has the business evolved a lot since you guys were first doing it? I mean, because it feels like ads, and you each had kind of both Romney and Obama, kind of different sort of candidates, and the world has changed a lot. So the ads felt fresher, and they select last year, and they felt more highly produced. Has the production values changed a lot, like in the approach?
Well, in part, you know, technology to do certain things. I mean, just hearkening back to when I first came to work with David, I remember the year we were there, we were doing a bunch of Illinois primaries and involved radio spots. And one of the guys who did radio spots for us used to have the reel-to-reel with a little razor blade where he'd cut and edit spots that way. And it happened to be that year that Leo Burnett opened up the first digital sound studio in Chicago. So I was on the low end of the totem pole. I spent a little more time at the guy who had the razor blade, but we were doing our higher end stuff now that studio that guy had with all that equipment that was so expensive is stuff that your iPhone can do at a higher level of quality. So the ability to bring that kind of quality at a reasonable cost, and as Ashley said, for the reasonable time turnarounds, has changed dramatically, not just since 1990, but even in the time between 2008 and 2012.
Right. Do the students here know that there's a thing called tape and there was sound and they played it? It was crazy. You still see it in Star Trek sometimes. Now, another difference between what you guys do and what Madison Avenue does is the toaster doesn't talk back or have opinions or have family members, especially like poor Jim had Congressman Weiner as a client, I believe.
Well, thanks for raising that.
Which may have set you up for an Oscar Mayer account, but so what? Sorry, I wanted to get the Weiner joke in some time. But anyway, what is that like working with
a Weiner?
No, working with a human being and their families, especially these two human beings. So maybe if we could speak in generalities, that'd be great. And then I'm curious about, and I'm sure everyone here is about Obama, how he likes being filmed and their families, and Romney as well and his family.
Look, I think in the case of the president, who he was, how he was perceived, that family, those daughters, the first lady, in many respects, they were our water wings a year ago or a year and a half ago when unemployment was over 8%, when our, job approval ratings weren't quite what you'd want them to be. There was this fundamental sense that this man, shared the same kind of values that we have, that even if we weren't satisfied with the rate of change or how quickly things were happening economically, that in fact, in terms of the direction that he was pointing and what he was trying to do, we're very much in sync with what we believe and what our families are all about. And that provided, I think, a tremendous lift for us. And ultimately, you know, and we talk about this with Ashley, I mean, there was a contrast there that we felt was very, very important in terms of the orientation between kind of where he was pointing and who he was fighting for, and did he understand you? That those are elements that can be very, very helpful to you. On the other hand, you know, you do have all those human qualities that that a product never has, and as a result, you know, you're going to be tested often, and it can be the candidate, it can be the spouse, it can be, you know, any number of things that just happen. It can be somebody having a bad night, like a first debate. And, you know, those things happen because we're human beings. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you all try going out there and being on, whether you're Governor Romney or President Obama, and do, you know, 300 events over a couple of months and see how it works out for you. You know, there are going to be some good days and bad days.
So would he get annoyed? Like, Mr. President, you have to sit here, and you dealt with this with Bush as well. You have to sit here. We really have to deal with this, and he's got national security issues popping. I mean, what was that process like? Can you talk about it at all?
I mean, one thing I would that I walk away with from the experience is that I've had, you know, when you work for the president, you have friends and relatives who the first question they always ask is, what's he really like? And it's always a hard question with this guy, because the truth is he is exactly what he appears to be. And the reason why I think that's relevant is because in the media, whether it was talking about his views on issues, whether it was contrasting him with the other opponent, or whether it was him on camera and how he wanted to be presented, he wanted to come across, authenticity was his sort of watchword, and he didn't want to be packaged into something that he was not. He was not, that was not the kind of way he was willing to be promoted. He didn't want the ads that didn't feature him to sort of not be faithful to his core beliefs. And so there was kind of I think that to the extent there was sort of a talking back or resistance or that kind of a thing, it was really, I think, him kind of preserving and protecting a sense of authenticity that he cared about, and I think smartly knew was a great political asset.
Let me just give you one little anecdote since we're trying to do those things. So we're in where were we, David? In the East Room that we were filming one day. This was after the second debate, I believe, so it wasn't right after the first debate. We were doing a 1 or 2 minute spot with him, 2 camera. He was beat. He had been on the road for days after that debate. He walked in. He was dead tired. He goes, okay, I really, really, really want to do this in 1 or 2 takes. That's it. I want to get out of here, which is about as short as I have ever heard him be. He's always totally, you know. To which I said, well, yes, sir. It's kind of what you do with the President of the United States. And I said, by the way, we're going to put about $25 million behind this spot. So if you're not feeling really good about it, you may want to do it a third or fourth time, because I take your point. And he was, you know, totally locked in, ready to go. We're going to get it right. I want it to be right. And, you know, he did everything he needed to do.
That's a great anecdote.
Yeah, I think we were obviously in a very different position. Voters had gotten to know President Obama, gotten to know his family, and we had a short window comparatively. You know, come April, we are introducing Mitt Romney, and so it's just a very different dynamic. And to the point of technology, because technology has come so far, we really made sure that we used that to our advantage in the sense that we went out and gathered lots and lots of footage. And, you know, the governor was out campaigning all the time. He was sort of most passionate and at his very best when he was interacting with voters, and you could capture that. And we would just then decide, thank you, Governor, head back to the edit room and let all the work happen in the edit room.
And was Governor Romney very involved in that process? We would hear from you guys that he would look on his iPad on his plane. Like, how involved was he in the process, and how opinionated was he about the ads you guys were proposing to air?
I think it varied. He was very involved in the process in the sense that everything that he saw everything, weighed in. Plenty of nights that he actually, he would review the ad and would bring up very good points. And we would turn around and head back into the edit room. He was a huge asset in that sense.
Were the points about his performance or message?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
A little bit of both. And so he was very involved. And I think we're all glad that he was. I mean, he has some very good points.
And did Anne, and I read somewhere that Tag Romney was the brains of the operation. That was a report that eventually was kind of knocked down. Right?
Yeah.
But, did the family get very involved? And you always hear the families say, as Dave and I've spoke about in the past too, that they'll say sometimes, this isn't him, or this, or friends, like, this isn't the guy we know. Why can't you? Did you get any of that from?
Well, I think that, it was funny, speaking of anecdotal stories, when the articles were coming out that Tag was so heavily involved, we had actually just had a shoot at Tag's house where he left and went apple picking. And I was laughing, thinking like, well, he really was heavily involved. But I think the family's a huge asset. They're an amazing family and very close-knit, and they were willing to help whenever needed. And if you look at our convention film, there are individual interviews with each of the sons and, Mrs. Romney, which certainly isn't uncommon, but, they were really willing to kind of lend their time and do whatever was needed. As far as the family critiquing our work and sort of, they never really got in the way. I mean, they really believed in what we were doing, and they knew they were fantastic out on the campaign trail, and that's really where they wanted to be.
Okay, so that wraps up our friendly part. No, I'm just kidding. But now, but we did want to move into the past year that we all lived through, and I think both sides have agreed that they would kind of walk us through sort of the arc of the story that they told, more or less, right, with some of their spots that they think were quite representative of how they were trying to handle this campaign. And I know, again, from reporting, that you always hear at the beginning of a campaign, we have a plan, but, these plans rarely work out as expected. So I wonder if also, as you're discussing it, you could talk about shifts or things you didn't expect. But do you guys want to start with the spots that I guess there are like a couple spots that you've picked out?
Sure. I think in terms of kind of the broad arc of what we were trying to accomplish, what we knew going in, and this didn't change, was that this was an election that was going to be based on the economy, and that we would face an opponent whose basic argument was, things aren't going well, he's in charge, replace him with somebody new. But that was kind of the thing that was going to be against us. And it actually was a daunting proposition. We were facing unemployment at levels at which no president had ever been reelected, with the exception of Roosevelt in his first term. So this kind of idea that was what was coming at us, as simple as it may sound, was one that we had spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we would overcome. So one of the metrics, one of the challenges of definition that was always going on was something we measured by asking people which candidate they thought would do a better job of understanding the economy and creating jobs. And on that, we always had a deficit, and we measured our progress by how we were able to close that deficit. On the other side, what we learned through our research was there was actually something people cared about more than the slow progress of the recession, and more than their judgment about President Obama's stewardship over the past 3 years. And that was about a longer, decades-long erosion in middle-class living standards. People had seen the kind of basic American dream, the basic expectations people had, that if you worked hard and you were responsible and did what you were supposed to, you could, in this country, expect a certain level of security in exchange for that. And so many people had seen, particularly after the credit meltdown, and so many people lost their houses and really their last claim to wealth, so many people had seen that whole dream kind of eroding. And they were more angry and more anxious and more emotional about that issue than they were about trying to figure out how well Obama did over the past 3 years. And so this was the second metric by which we measured our progress. Who do you want to put in charge of this project of rebuilding the middle class? who would do a better job of rebuilding the middle class. And on that one, we had a great advantage, and we measured our progress by whether we were pushing open that advantage. So you kind of have this two-dimensional game. On one hand, you're trying to contract this one and expand this one, and on the other hand, it's a battle of definitions. Voter, we want you to think about this when you vote. And the other campaign, voter, we want you to think about this when you vote. And so that was the long arc of the campaign. It was either trying to tighten this margin up or expand this one. And I think that we were pretty faithful to that plan that we laid out. Most of what happened after that really was related to we tried to bring back to and drive through those 2 points.
So, and did you have there was a spot, the opening spot that you wanted to maybe?
Yeah, so the first one, do you want to add to that, Jim?
Well, sure. I mean, so as you think about the campaign, there were a couple of important decisions that got made. We can leave it for questions and answers, but, one of them was the decision to move forward a good deal of money that might have been used later in the campaign to earlier in the campaign. That was mostly to focus on trying to do the definition of Governor Romney before he defined himself. But if you looked at it sort of in how this played out, we opened with, believe it or not, positive spots. You wouldn't know it by the reporting.
We didn't write about those.
By the reporting.
Boring.
But by the reporting, there was about $25 million that was put up in May of last year that really tried to do a couple of things. One was to remind people what the president faced when he came into office. Because, believe it or not, you probably don't remember that we were losing 750,000 jobs a month when he was raising his hand to take the oath of office in 2009. And so when you're measuring that against maybe gaining 150,000 jobs a month, that may not be solving all of our problems, but it sure beats losing 750,000. So context, reminding people what the president faced, giving them some sense of accomplishment. But listen, as you hear the spots, and I think all of the spots, tonally, we would try to be very, very careful, and David was always on us to make sure that we went, as he would say, overshoot the runway, to never sort of imply that we were in a better shape if people are, worried about their house or their house is worth half as much as it was before. Let's be careful that we don't try to imply that we've made more progress than we have in terms of syncing it with what people are feeling. So this was an opening 60.
Go.
This is called Go.
2008, an economic meltdown.
Worst financial collapse since the Great Depression.
4.4 million jobs lost.
American workers were laid off in numbers not seen in over 3 decades.
America's economy spiraling down.
The biggest point drop that's ever been seen in a day.
All before this president took the oath.
So help me God.
Some said our best days were behind us, but not him.
Don't bet against the American worker.
He believed in us, fought for us. And today, our auto industry is back, firing on all cylinders. Our greatest enemy brought to justice by our greatest heroes. Our troops are home from Iraq. Instead of losing jobs, we're creating them. Over 4.2 million so far. We're not there yet. It's still too hard for too many. But we're coming back because America's greatness comes from a strong middle class. Because you don't quit, and neither does he.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Now, you're not going to believe this, but I am old enough to remember the Morning in America ads that Ronald Reagan did, just barely. And how much did, this is always an obvious question, but I'm still curious about it. How much did you guys look at that Reagan tone, and how much did you hope, let's say 2 years out from Election Day, that you could go that hard on we're back? And, how much thought had to go into exactly how you modulate the tone? Because it was a tightrope, right, for you guys, so.
We knew it wasn't Morning in America, right? So we knew we couldn't.
You knew that from early in that.
There was no we're back.
In 09 or in 10, even, you just knew that was going to be off the table.
No, that was not the mood the voters were in early 2011 when we started developing and testing these things. And even beyond that, we had very limited latitude in, you notice in this spot, very modest claims. Things are kind of moving forward, but it's still too hard for too many. So we weren't pushing too hard. We tried some that were that pushed it a little further. I mean, nothing anywhere near Morning America, but that pushed it a little further. We tried some that were a little more dour, and this was really kind of right in the sweet spot. This is as much as people were able to accept, and I think it's a good question in that we really were constrained. We couldn't go too far, and that's what we came up with.
So now I wonder if we should do is, I guess maybe Ashley could talk now because it's a kind of chronological. Right. That's how we like it.
Our opening.
So you guys are there. How are you reading what they're doing, and what are you guys thinking and planning at that stage?
Well, when we saw that ad, it reminded us very much of how we opened President Bush's re-election campaign. Similar, it was named Safer, Stronger. It was this sort of similar, let's remind people how tough things were when the president came into office. So we sort of had a sense of what you guys were doing, and the tone was clear to us that you weren't trying to overstate accomplishments. I mean, for us, tone was also very important. When we would listen to voters, we would realize they were disappointed in President Obama, but they still really liked him. And they knew the economy was bad, tough. And if we spent time and, more importantly, resources telling them something they knew, it didn't move them. It didn't matter. And they were willing, because they liked President Obama, to give him 4 more years. So we really had to watch our tone and when we would talk about it. And we decided that to open the campaign, we needed to make it clear that if Romney were president, things would change quickly. And that maybe you can't afford 4 more years. On day one, things will change. We wanted to make it future-oriented, keep it on policy, and start talking about the experience that he's had and how he turned around Massachusetts. He was a governor of a state where there was the economy was tough. He brought jobs. He turned a deficit into a surplus. And we really wanted to kind of orient the governor as the change, as the solution. And so we started with an ad named Day One.
What would a Romney presidency be like? Day one. President Romney immediately approves the Keystone Pipeline, creating thousands of jobs that Obama blocked. President Romney introduces tax cuts and reforms that reward job creators, not punish them. President Romney issues order to begin replacing Obamacare with common sense health care reform. That's what a Romney presidency will be like.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
We ended up making a series. There's so much to do. We couldn't tell you in one ad. It was our solution to a 60. We just had a couple 30s rolling out. And we regionalized them. We wanted to make sure that we were addressing the policies that would help the economy in different areas and make sure that we were talking about what voters cared about in different states. And the other thing I forgot to mention, but everything that we wanted to do was to, point towards the economy. Everything was through the economic lens. And when we entered the race, we had a long primary. And in August 2011, the president's approval rating was in 41%, and approval on how he's handling the economy, 26%.
Do you guys remember that?
And, ultimately it was a little bit different a year later, but I think that for us, everything needed to be told through the eyes of the economy, and that there was an urgency that you don't have to accept 4 more years. We can change this.
So is that why sometimes in a presidential campaign, what a campaign wants to do is introduce their person as a person, right? And did you guys debate whether you needed to do, hi, I'm Mitt Romney, this is my family, here's what I've accomplished? I mean, what was the thinking to go here instead of there?
We thought about the traditional, this is me, this is my family, but voters voters were really disappointed, and they didn't want to know sort of the backstory. They wanted to know, okay, who are you? What are you going to do? You know, there was an urgency there. What are you going to do? I mean, I like President Obama. Maybe 4 more years he can turn it around, but if you're someone new, what are you going to do? And we really had to, lay it out for voters right away that we could turn the economy around.
Right. And so Jim and Larry, this brings me to, towards the end of the campaign, one of you, it might have been Larry, but, was talking about how important it was to go after his governor's record from early on, and which I didn't kind of get as much, through the campaign. But in general, you guys knew that it was important for you to get him defined negatively as quickly as possible, because what were you most worried about that they were going to be able to accomplish that kind of late spring, early summer period?
Well, if people were willing to accept that this guy had the Midas touch and could really solve the economic problems, we were in deep trouble. And so that was our biggest concern, particularly at that early phase. There was the shift that we were ready to make to the solve it for who would benefit, and which is the middle class argument. But we tried very hard in the early phase of the campaign, when I was talking about contracting that margin that he had about who can understand the economy and create jobs. You can see that spot was really more about that. We got to the middle class arguments later, and the initial negative advertising we did was about his Massachusetts record, and it took on the idea that he was a job creator and he knew how to create jobs because he'd said all those same things when he ran for governor in Massachusetts. And there was a lot of reports that his economic record was awful. They're 47th out of 50 states in job creation. And so we really focused on that. And by the way, there was a lot of criticism of us for focusing on that. The first month when we were running these accomplishment spots, there were guys running around with polls and people saying, what's Obama doing? He can't get anywhere on accomplishments. People aren't willing to accept that he has accomplished anything. He needs to move to other arguments. But we felt that we needed to sort of lay down a foundation on that stuff, lay down the foundation on the Romney stuff to try and close that gap on who could run the economy. These campaigns we had 35 ads, right? So we could devote a few at the front end to do some foundational stuff before we really went into the stuff that we knew was the sort of juiciest and would attract the most attention and would make the most movement.
And I was just going to have one line, which is to say, look, if the rationale for the candidacy for Romney was he can fix it, he knows how to do it, he's a business guy, this is what he can bring home. And if we could undercut that, you were in large part undercutting the rationale for the candidacy. So there was a good deal of effort that was put into that. I don't know, which spots are we showing?
It's going to be Pioneer.
So we're going right.
Before you, I have one point about this too.
Hit it.
So early on, as you pointed out, you wanted to go after the record in Massachusetts. And, here we are in the middle of our day one spots feeling, positive, although we're highlighting what President Obama hasn't accomplished, but in a positive tone, future-oriented, feeling very good about ourselves. And then they launch a very tough negative about the governor's record in Massachusetts. And we knew that we couldn't let it go unanswered. We didn't want to look defensive. We didn't want to throw ourselves off message. I mean, we were only 3 ads into the general election. And so what we decided to do was take our day one series and make it all positive about what the governor did in Massachusetts. And so it looked as if this was going to be our 4th ad in the series anyway. And we were able to get it up on the air at the same time as your negative was on the air.
I think I never knew that was a response ad, so that's news.
If that's the only news I make tonight, I'll be happy.
Bite your tongue. Usually you don't recognize that when it happens.
Hello. That's rough.
Now we're even.
I'm just going to stay, you know what, I'm going to be Obama-like and stay above the fray, which gets me to You did, before we set up this ad, you did have a quandary, right, in terms of your candidate represented, or was whether you wanted it to work out as well as it did, was supposedly this transcendent figure. Now, the interesting thing about the 2008 campaign is that Obama emerged from it and was seen as just like he's changed politics, and they were doing tons of negative stuff, and they weren't getting beaten up for it the way a candidate usually does. There was a lot of finesse involved, but you had to do that act again. So I don't know if this works, but in setting up the spot, can you also talk about your own kind of discussions about when you attack as a candidate, you might lower it's a rule of politics that you're going to lower the other guy's standing, but you're going to lower your own as well. And for Obama, it's doubly tricky, we thought, in the press at least, maybe we were wrong, but that he was going to lower himself and lose his special brand. So in setting that up,
we, as Ashley has said in our previous conversations, the new information is what moves voters. And they already knew a lot about Obama, both positive and negative. There wasn't a lot we could say, as you saw part of it, but we said some things to set it up, but there wasn't a lot of new information for people to learn about him, positive or negative. Romney, on the other hand, was a blank slate. And so there was just more ground to be gained by filling in people's information gaps there. So that's kind of it's not, there's sort of no choice, but to kind of go where voters need information. And you can't spend all your time where they're already kind of saturated with information. So we had to we had to talk about our opponent. We had to contrast. We, I think, had constraints on our tone that were important, and we're about to show a very, very tough ad, by the way. But, we tried to be relevant about things that people cared about. We tried to be, factual and stick to things that were, verifiable and true. And it was and I think there's a line that we kind of stayed within, that was constrained by who he is and what people expect of him. Can I just say one quick thing on the setup of this, which was we did the Massachusetts governor's thing we were going to do it for an entire month. We did it for 3 weeks. And at that time, at the end of the 3 weeks, a story hit in the Washington Post that said that Romney had owned these companies that shipped a bunch of jobs overseas. And it became a firestorm in the news. So we had planned we were a couple of weeks away from when we had planned to move kind of to these stories to ads about his businesses. But since this story hit, we made the shift to kind of get in when it was hot. And here's the spot that we ran, Pioneers.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
The Chinese are smiling all the way to the bank, taking our jobs and taking a lot of our future. And I'm not willing to let that happen.
He made a fortune letting it happen. Published documents show Mitt Romney's firms were pioneers at helping companies outsource their manufacturing to countries including China, bragging they were a one-stop shop for their outsource requirements. Mitt Romney's not the solution, he's the problem.
By the way, that is a tough ad.
Is that you guys watching your tone?
I want to hear Ashley's response to this, but it's also, I just want to mark that's also news that you changed. That's a place where you changed your plan and saw your opportunity. What was your guys' reaction when you saw that? Does it start with S?
Yeah, it's a very tough ad, and we looked back on the 2008 primary, and there were some moments between Hillary Clinton and then Senator Obama that were heated, and she accused him of sort of false attacks. And so it's one thing for us to say, this is wrong, these are false attacks. So instead we packaged an ad where we sort of harken back to this, and you have Hillary Clinton saying, shame on you. Oh, yeah. And, part of our winning coalition was making sure that sort of moderate, independent women were coming to us. So we were hoping to sort of tap into some of that as well. And we put it out there, and at the time we were being outspent 3-1, and it didn't break through. It was tough. I mean, we're just literally, being outspent dramatically, and we couldn't make a difference. So then a fact check came out saying that this was untrue, that these attacks. So we thought, okay, this is fantastic. We repackaged the Shame on You ad. We named it No Evidence. We put in 2 sources, the Washington Post and factcheck.org, refuting these attacks, put it on the air, and, you know, we couldn't get traction on this. It was very, very challenging.
Even then. And I hope you guys don't mind, I want to take one little aside since you raised it. I was going to raise this later, but the fact check phenomenon, these websites that fact check the ads, and even Anderson Cooper has a Keeping 'Em Honest segment, which makes you wonder what's on the rest of the time on his show. But anyway, I didn't realize that was a special
Going
thing.
negative on him.
But anyway, no, this isn't on C-SPAN.
Somebody tweeted it.
Anyway,
it is.
But well, he's a fine journalist. But anyway, he is. But that's a new thing, right? And I remember that Russ Schrieffer, Ashley's partner, had told me in the 2004 campaign, and he wasn't saying anything that anyone on the other side wouldn't have said to us too, is nobody pays attention to your fact checks. They just don't matter. So knock yourself out. And again, that was not unique to either side. So I was going to ask you, has the proliferation of these new fact check sites and cable news doing these changed things in terms of what you can get away with in an ad?
Look, it is something that we are aware of and paying some attention to. And on the other hand, I think there may be a disagreement. There could be a disagreement between the three of us even. I personally don't think, given the proliferation actually of all this stuff, and that one campaign puts up their false, negative, not true, and the other one says, here's 3 other sites that say it's not true. And I think for people, it becomes sort of part of the mashup of all this information that's just coming in, and probably sort of calls into question what they already believe, which is, I'm not sure any of this stuff is true. Huh. Goes back to Larry's and my point, and probably Ashley's point at the beginning, that it has to feel authentic, that it has to feel right. And a lot of the time, we would be pulling ourselves back, to be quite honest with you, not because we were worried about a fact check, but we were worried about people's eyeballs watching stuff and saying, that is just garbage. And so a lot of that, I think, is self-regulated, at least in our case. And we haven't talked about it tonight. I don't think that the third-party groups felt nearly as constrained, that is, all those independent expenditure groups. I don't know that they helped themselves, because I think people are still looking at that stuff and saying, I'm not sure that's accurate or not. But for me, the presence of the fact-checking itself didn't prove to be a big deal. Although we used it, we said, false, and we, did all that.
And nobody wants to launch an ad and have it, fact-checked and, ripped apart. I mean, you put together ads, you write your scripts, based on, the policy and the headlines, and you assemble what you think is a strong argument, and you believe in that argument. And I think that while you pay attention to what happens with the fact checks, you don't sort of launch an ad thinking, okay, well, this is going to get fact checked poorly and we don't care. It's not at all the case. I mean, this is something, I'm Mitt Romney and I approve this message. That means something. And, I think to all candidates, you owe it to make sure that you're putting forward good information.
Could I just throw in on this, Jim? I think there is a great place in the marketplace for somebody to do fact checks well. You asked about the proliferation, and there's a bunch of lousy fact checking going on. And honestly, the irony of it is they really don't fact check, they opinion check, because they say, well, they said this and it's kind of in a gray area, therefore mostly false.
Right.
And that's not a fact, that's an opinion. And so I think it's good of them to point out that that's a gray area and there's argument on both sides. But to sort of be judge and jury with no rules of evidence and honestly sometimes kind of really flawed reasoning, The reason why people cared less about when we used fact checks against the other side this time than they did in 2008 was because it's been cheapened.
Though I would say that factcheck.org and PolitiFact, and I know you guys had some fights with him, but Glenn Kessler at the Post, I mean, did you find that they were pretty straight in terms of their approaches? One of which is Pulitzer Prize winning.
No, I mean, I'm telling, I think that the preponderance of the analysis we got from them was they would look at a gray area of the law and or of the statement. For instance, what Ashley referred to here is the statement we made here was that those were Romney's firms that shipped jobs overseas. Romney said in response, "There weren't my firms. I had already left Bain by then." We said in response, well, you signed documents with the SEC saying that you were the president, CEO, and sole shareholder. So we feel like it's fair that we say that those are your firms. They said they fact-checked against us on that. It was a gray area, right? Maybe he was already gone on one hand, he signed all these papers on the other hand, and somebody, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist decided that, we were mostly wrong. I don't think that's a fact check. I think that is somebody's, opinion. And so that's why I think that there's a market for somebody who talks about facts and fact checks.
But they could say the same thing on, okay, there's a Jeep ad, and I want to get to this point yet, because I was trying to keep a chronology, but we'll let it go for a second. There was a Jeep ad that these guys did that became very famous, and it said, well, we have the ad. Can we actually cue that up?
Who will do more?
Because it's good. It'll go to Larry's point.
Who will do more for the auto industry? Not Barack Obama. Fact checkers confirm his attacks on Mitt Romney are false. The truth? Mitt Romney has a plan to help the auto industry. He's supported by Lee Iacocca and the Detroit News. Obama took GM and Chrysler into bankruptcy and sold Chrysler to Italians who are going to build Jeeps in China. Mitt Romney will fight for every American job.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
But I want to say, though, to Larry's point, that ad is technically true. That would fall into your gray area.
Thank you.
But we still called BS on it because, it left an impression that they were going to move this plant off to China.
Well, and, we wordsmithed it to be very careful, to be factually accurate. And when fact checkers come out and dispute it, and I think Larry's brought up a really good point, there's opinion in there, but to me what is so challenging is you've launched a message and you're trying to drive something, and some fact checker has just taken it the whole other direction.
Do you guys agree with that on that ad?
I mean, I honestly think this. I don't think, yes, I think that they did, there was sort of conjecture here. But my conjecture on this one was, it was wordsmith deliberately to get people to think that the jobs in Toledo were the ones that were getting, sent to China. And I think that it's fair to point that out. I think that's a different matter than, is this factually inaccurate? But the fact is, I'm speculating about your motives, but what it looks like to me in this spot is it's deliberately trying to get people to think that those Ohio jobs are the ones moving to China, which factually was not the case. They were creating new jobs in China because so many people in China were buying Jeeps.
Ashley, was it?
Our greater point was that we wanted to remind people that it was President Obama that took the auto industry into bankruptcy, and that's kind of honestly where we were wordsmithing the most.
And as a reporter, when I go through these, when I started doing this, in the Go4 campaign, in the beginning, I would get into these things with the staffs of, well, actually, but if you look at this, and their backup always makes sense. And their backups, they often have good arguments. And I always find myself saying, and maybe this goes to the art of doing advertising, is, well, if you just said that, we couldn't dispute it, and it's still a very good argument. So sometimes, and it still seemed plenty emotional, so sometimes for you guys, is it you want to go as far as you can to really make an impact on the audience? Is it sometimes the amount of time you have in the ad? Like sometimes you guys can make the same argument and we couldn't say anything about it.
But we are limited to 27 seconds now. which makes it more challenging.
Right. Look,
because the 3 seconds is I approve this message?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Sorry.
It is.
No, I think at the end of the day, you're trying to make the best argument that you can in the time that you have. And I go back to what we talked about before. It also has to feel accurate if it's going to be effective. And there's plenty of examples which I think weren't effective because, you know, it was too bombastic and too over the top. But in circumstances like the Jeep ad, we would probably argue, gee, is that the best place to play out the race at that point? We'd spend an awful lot of time and money saying President Obama had saved the auto industry, and very late in the campaign, was that going to be the best argument? They're looking at their own stuff. They're trying to figure out how are we going to thread the needle in Ohio. But, you know, it's got to ring true at the end of the day.
And I'll say an interesting thing about that ad, and it'll get us back on track in terms of the narrative, is when you get to that ad, I went to Toledo, and I went outside that Jeep plant, and that Jeep plant sits right in the middle of Toledo. It's like central to that town. And I found a couple guys who walked out, real white, working class young men, and I asked them about that ad. And they had just been hired, and they said, well, we know we've been hired here, so we're getting hired. And Romney, he's just rich. He doesn't care about us. So if I can use that to segue back into where we left off in this diversion is, so you guys decided to hammer that home. For you guys, how did you try to kind of wiggle out of this definition that Romney is a stiff, rich guy, which all these things are caricatures, right? So how did you try to get past that?
Well, I think a couple different ways. We really felt like as you guys were defining Mitt Romney, that we had many different things we wanted to do. We wanted to put out defining Mitt Romney in our positive ad campaign. We wanted to deliver new information about what some of the president's policies. And you can, at the time, we could only do one thing, and given our budget constraints. And we thought that educating voters on President Obama was just more effective. And actually what often gets overlooked is we did do an ad. And if you have a second, I think it's named, something about Better Future. But we did do an ad that, Believe in Our Future, yeah, where we were trying to define Romney in the midst of all of this negative advertising.
My own experience was I got the chance to start my own business. I know what it's like to hire people and to wonder whether you're going to be able to make ends meet down the road.
Freedom and free enterprise are what create jobs, not government.
From those experiences, I went off to have the chance of running the Olympics in Salt Lake City in 2002. I came in and found that we had not only a scandal to deal with, but also a financial crisis to deal with. By the time the games were over, we had about $100 million that we put into an endowment there for the future of Olympic sport. The real experience was in Massachusetts. I found a budget that was badly out of balance. We cut our spending. My legislature was 85% Democrat, and every one of the 4 years I was governor, we balanced the budget. And I want to use those experiences to help Americans have a better future.
We believe in our future. We believe in ourselves. We believe the greatest days of America are ahead.
Believe in the America you built. Believe we can build it again.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
In our ARC, we had our Day One series. We get attacked on the Massachusetts record, so we packaged sort of a rebuttal as a Day One. Then we're being attacked for sending jobs overseas, and we're trying to push that back using factcheck.org in the Washington Post. And then we decide, we move forward with let's start defining Governor Romney. And it's a 60, and for a campaign, that's a big investment. And other than being on the air, it's sort of a third of the rate as their negative ads. The press didn't pick it up. We pushed it, and it just didn't get the traction that it needed. And maybe if we had triple the amount of dollars and could have blasted it over the airwaves as loudly as the negative attacks, it could have been slightly different. But,
You couldn't get the cash behind that, though.
Right. We were in the primary at the time, and we only had our primary money where we'd spent significant resources actually securing the primary. So by the time we were the presumptive nominee, our resources had been depleted.
So, and did you guys notice that ad when it came out?
Yeah.
Did you think it looked like a good ad to me? But you tell me.
It happened, and we tested it along with, I'm almost certain every ad that they ran. It aired at a time when a lot of our ads attacking the governor's record and his business record had already run, and they were kind of pushing a rock up a hill. They were really kind of countering. There was already a settled in sense of who he was from our previous ads, and this was. I think Ashley's evaluation is fair that it was just kind of a drop in the ocean.
I will say that, for example, though, I don't know whether you all saw their convention film. I thought their convention film was phenomenal. And, it, unfortunately, from your perspective or my analysis, it ran at 5 minutes to 10 instead of 10:05 when Mr. Eastwood was on. And if you could have flipped that, even if you had him and had him before the networks all cut to the convention at 10 o'clock, and but there was, and I thought late in the campaign, there was some very strong spots that also kind of filled in the picture a little bit more.
And do we have to move to questions pretty soon, or what's our time? Can I ask one last question of Ashley about attacking these guys? Because I thought the most interesting thing the whole campaign was the thing you opened up your statement with, which was that Obama was still liked. So attacking him, and I heard this from the super PACs, which we didn't even get to, it's the harder you attacked him, the more reaction there would be from the audience. So how were you handling that? So people kind of get defensive of him, who were ready. A lot of the voters they needed were voters who voted for Obama last time and were considering bolting. So,
it's really just language and measuring, sort of measuring your tone. And we found very early on that, if you used words like failed, well, he didn't fail. I mean, they were very quick to defend him. And so if you used careful language to lead them to come to their own outcome, their own thought of what we're trying to say, it was much more effective. He didn't live up to the promise, or, he's tried but hasn't. Very different than using the word failed. And it's something we learned very early on, and it took a lot of discipline to apply this throughout the campaign.
Can I just add one point on that, which I think it was what frightened us the most, was that you would be right in that zone, at least me, probably Larry and David. Larry said that too. The problem that you had was $450 million of independent expenditures on your behalf that you didn't control the message. And so there was this cacophony of what I would call confusion for people, because you might be disciplined and you might be using the right language, but Karl Rove or any of the other groups might be coming at us with a bulldozer. And so from what voters might be perceiving, it was a hard thing for you. And we recognize that.
And voters don't separate a super PAC from the campaign.
Right.
Even though we do have to yield our 3 seconds to the approval, it's lost on a voter. So when a very harsh attack would come on the air, even though it wasn't our ad, we would have to own it.
Right. I have to be selfless now and give up the microphone to our audience. It's so great having you guys we can keep this going afterwards.
Let me make one point before you get to the questions, and people should line up to ask their questions.
Wow.
Oh.
I better make it quick.
Sorry.
What Ashley said is very important. There are a lot of advantages to being the incumbent. One of them is generally you don't have a primary campaign. And so we had a lot of time to plan and to execute they had to spend a lot of their time and, more importantly, many of their resources trying to fend off very competitive primary candidates. And, that was advantageous, and that was true for President Bush, and it's true for incumbents generally. So that's one of the advantages that we had and that we used. Now you got a whole bunch of people.
I wanted to ask something personal, actually. How do you, I'm going to draw out an example. I didn't want it to be a personal example, so I'm going to give an example from how National Rifle Association makes ads against Obama. And so let's think about a situation where you have the chance of launching an ad. You think it's going to be effective. It can pass the fact check, but it's just wrong. I mean, you don't believe it. It can help the candidate. It might pass a fact check, but you don't believe in that ad. In that kind of a situation, how would you feel comfortable in using that material or not?
You don't believe it's factually accurate?
Yes.
Ultimately, especially in a presidential campaign, the arbiters, aren't the fact checkers. They're the voters. And, yes, I think people in our business should have a moral screen, and there should be things that you're not willing to do, even if you think you can get away with it. So I think to just be direct to your first thing, yes. But actually, at a more practical level, voters out there have pretty good intuition on these things.
Mm-hmm.
And just, on not to pick on actually, but the Jeep ad, for instance, Chrysler came out and said, and this is extraordinary for a company to come out and interject itself and they said, wait a second, this isn't true. Well, to be in that position as the advertiser, you're really screwed, because now your credibility's called into question. So the most important thing, just from self-interest standpoint, is you don't want to lie, because getting caught is a bad reflection on your campaign.
We were discussing technology earlier tonight. One type of ad that we didn't discuss much tonight was online advertising. And one new feature of 2012 advertising, maybe this is the case in 2008, I don't know, is that people can watch an ad on YouTube and then click a link, and then go donate. I'm curious about the extent to which you guys considered ads as a vehicle for money raising, and if either campaign noticed any strong trends in what types of advertising online elicited donations.
Well, for our campaign, we paid a lot of attention to that. It was a way to find small donors. It was a way to expand our donor base, and it was also a way to drive a story. So we would take every opportunity to make an online ad or a web ad and push it out for voters to see. And some get picked up and some don't, but because we had built our editorial capability in-house at the campaign and it was salaried, there wasn't necessarily an expense associated with it. So we really, we populated our YouTube channel quite, and I think it worked well. I think that it was interesting to see certain things would get picked up. Like, for example, that we had created a mini campaign around "You Built It" when the president had come out saying that that you didn't build a business, and in the earned media and paid, it wasn't necessarily our top message that we wanted to be delivering, but we found it created a lot of enthusiasm online. It drove donations from entrepreneurs, small business owners, and we really used that online to our advantage.
Go ahead. The one, we did a lot of this advertising for acquisition of donors. We had a separate approaches to advertising. One was we did online advertising that largely was either exactly what we were running on television or 15-second cut downs of what we were running on television. That was for the purposes of persuasion. We had an entire different operation that did advertising for donor acquisition. And actually, one of the things I always used to tell people is that when we get vendors who'd want to, sell us ad space, The one person on our campaign who had an unlimited budget, unlimited, was the person who did the acquisition advertising, because it was all based on ROI. They could spend as much as they wanted, as long as the return on the spots and the other ads was bringing back a certain ratio of dollars contributed to dollars spent. So it was very sophisticated. They did it not just with video, but banner ads, and we invested a lot in that. In 2008, a lot of our success online was because people just came to us, and how our expertise really was shown in how we kind of brought people in who came, what they experienced with the splash page, what they experienced when they got in. We had the My Barack Obama, My BO pages, so people could interact. And that nurturing of people who just came automatically was really the big innovation. This time, people were less excited about activism, and it was just a different kind of atmosphere, where the real innovation was how we went out and got them and brought them in.
Should also just one final comment, which is the big major events were also where you saw the huge amount of incoming. So debates, convention. What was our biggest night? Was it just from online? Was it the debate night? Or convention, speech.
The gay marriage announcement was an enormous.
So those kinds of things, and being able to capitalize on those, and on a whole series of platforms, be able to go out and bring people in and email and all of that was really, really important.
So I wanted to ask actually about, so I know there's the art of persuasion, but where sort of has the science and behavioral aspects stepped in? I mean, I hear every once in a while you guys mention testing or sort of some kind of data collection, but at what level was sort of psychological research behind persuasion being brought in? What kind of data, A/B testing, etc.? And how exactly does that set the standard both for future campaigns and campaigns around the rest of the world that does actually watch what happens in the US and sort of try and mimic it?
Well, I think there's some incredible technology out there for testing, and the Madison Avenue budgets sort of allow for it. And, I would talk to, chief marketing officers that would talk about sort of retina reaction to, advertising, and found it incredibly scientific, but it's a very large investment. And for us, we really wanted to hear what voters would say. And, we had a combination of both online testing, where you would be able to get sort of more feedback. You'd have more people watching. And then we also had focus groups 2 nights a week, sort of standing dates 2 nights a week for 4 hours each night, where you would talk to people. And for us, it was really important to probe and understand, like I said about tone, kind of where were voters? Was it sort of, were they starting to soften? Were the doubts being raised? Were they ready to move? Were they not ready to move? Do we need to kind of raise more doubts? And that's something that you really need to do in a dialogue. And we kept that dialogue going, the September and October 2-3 times a week in different key states.
We did most of our testing in this election online, and what happens is the researcher gets a panel of people who've agreed to be part of a study, and you send a certain number of them just a questionnaire to get their answers to who they're planning to vote for and how positively they feel about them, and then you send the treatment group, which may be anywhere from 200 to 300. The spot, and you ask them those same questions afterwards to see how they differ. Now you can see how artificial that is, right? Because they're asking questions after they're just seeing a spot. But if you're testing, 2 or 3 spots against each other, they've all sort of received that same kind of artificial treatment. And I think one of the important things about the testing is, and we spent a lot of time kind of debating this as we produced spots, but there's something that you want the voter to take away from the spot. You know, Ashley was talking about with the G-pad, what they really wanted people to take away was that Obama was the one who took those guys into bankruptcy. I suspect what a lot of people took away was more this kind of shipping to China thing. So we tried to set metrics on these online tests that really could tease out whether the things that we wanted to get across were getting across. And a lot of the metrics that we used on a routine basis were kind of about whether people have a skepticism about advertising in general, right? They know that you're advertising to get them to do something, right? And so they start out with skepticism. They're even more skeptical about political advertising because not only do they know you're trying to manipulate them, but they think we're all liars, right? So there's even a tougher hurdle to get over. And third, if it's negative, it's even tougher. So a lot of the metrics that we used, we're trying to get at, are we overcoming that skepticism? We asked people, is this believable? Is this credible? Is this backed up by evidence? Is it factual? Is this just a political ad, or is it something that you learned something from? Did you get new information? Those are the kinds of things that we were after to see if we were kind of getting over that credibility hump. And that was how we chose what spots to do. We did also do for almost every spot, if not everyone, we did qualitative, like Ashley's talking about. We did little mini groups that were specifically there for watching ads usually, because when you do the internet test, you don't get, as Ashley said, you don't get that kind of conversation with people. And when they say yes, I feel that way, you can't tell if they're saying yes, I feel that way or yes, I feel that way, right? But you can when they're sitting there in front of you, and you can ask them the follow-up questions.
It just had two things. One is, I suspect that part of your question was, are we trying to, manipulate and use psychological techniques to, and the short answer is, I think to the extent that you can create a connection with someone, it's not quite the psychology of it all, but emotion is powerful. A story is powerful. 10 facts in a row and jamming into 27 seconds, 5 different thoughts, even if each one of them tests well in a poll, is not going to get you very far. So part of this is the narrative. Part of it is the story. How do we connect? How is it, we spent time, I don't know where you came out. Should the disclaimer in an ad be at the front or the back? Mm-hmm. We have a choice.
We talked about that, yeah.
And it ended up about 50-50, in terms of, the agreements or disagreements on it. So there were those kinds of things that you try to figure out. But it's not, the secret word subliminally placed into the ad.
How did the retinal scan work for you guys? Yikes.
Hi, I'm really glad that question was asked because I was going to also ask about focus groups. And we had a couple of speakers and study groups here a few weeks ago talk about focus groups that the Obama campaign used. So I was planning to ask Ashley if you guys used focus groups. I see that you did. So one of the things we heard from the Obama focus groups was that they created attack ads against Obama to test them and then craft a response. Did you guys do anything like that? And if not, could you give another interesting anecdote about something you might have learned from those tests?
That's how I do it too. I was going to do that as tell us some anecdotes.
Budding journalist.
I love that question.
Often in campaigns you will make attack ads against your candidate. However, the Obama campaign gave us so many. We didn't need to do that. But we did test all of their ads. And I think one thing we would, I think that's sort of insightful is you test the attack against you, you test what you're going to come back with, and sometimes you'd even test, another attack they have against you. And you try to kind of war game this out a little bit to see, how to handle the situation, you're always thinking, I think Larry brought this up earlier, you're always thinking kind of 2-3 ads ahead, or, sort of messages ahead, and how do you lay those out? I don't have any anecdotal focus group information. I'm sure I'll think of it later, but nothing comes to mind other than for us it was really about following and managing tone. And when there's really harsh ads against you, it took a lot of restraint to not come back harshly. But the women that we were talking to in these focus groups made it very clear that was not acceptable.
Thank you all once again for coming here today for this. And I just want to say I think both sides have been very fair and respectful, so I want to commend you guys for that. I just want to touch up real quick on targeting specific demographics with advertisements. I have read articles that claimed that, and I did see it during the campaign, how the Obama campaign really tried to reach specific demographics by advertising on certain cable stations. Like, their research showed that a lot of women happen to watch Food Network, and they were advertising on TBS to reach the millennial crowd and stuff like that. And I've also heard articles that claim that the Romney campaign kind of just blanketed the broadcast networks with all the same ads, and it wasn't as targeted. So, A, I just want to know if that's accurate, and B, could you guys kind of elaborate on, how you guys approached that? What was your methodology, and, what demographics were you trying to target, and which cable stations did you go on? Thank you.
First and foremost, our main message was about the economy, and we felt that every American cared about that. So when there were times that we had one ad across all our key states and various networks that reached different demographics, that was on purpose. This was something that voters were very concerned about, and it didn't matter if you were a woman or a man or Hispanic or 22 or 62. People were concerned about the economy. But that said, in the general election, we actually did do a fair amount of advertising that was sort of women specific, and we would create a series of ads that only went on cable channels that women would watch, Lifetime or the Food Network or things like that, and it had a very different tone. And then on our broadcast, we'd have a different message. They would complement each other, and we were very cognizant that people were getting messages from both the broadcast buy and the cable buy, but we actually did do a fair amount. It was targeting women.
We did a lot of different tracks. So we had a general sort of advertising track that would be within these key battleground states. We had a women's track, a Spanish language track, an African American track. There were some advertisements that were focused more on youth, and we spent quite a bit of time trying to use some, this we can stand around and talk about it later. Some of the different capabilities that are an awesome analytics operation that we had internally helped us be able to focus a little bit more specifically on maybe some cable channels in particular that we might not have gone to because of lower numbers, but the people who were going there were more important to us, for example. And as a result, we could efficiently reach people that really mattered in terms of either turnout or in terms of persuasion. So I think there'll be more and more looking at this as time goes on and as technology goes on. And, we did a lot of segmentation.
If you think about in any given market, there's everybody in the market, and then there's the eligible voters, which is maybe 3/4 of them. And then there's those that are registered to vote, which is another half of those. And then there's those who are likely to vote, which is about 3/4 of those. And so among those likely voters, which now you're down to less than half already, 40-some% were tied up. We're always going to be for Obama, no matter what TV ad they saw. And 40-some% were going to be with Romney, no matter what TV ad they saw. And there's some maybe 15 to 20% in the middle, who the TV ads actually might affect. So, but now you're talking about maybe, 15% of the people in the market. So when you go to your ratings and they say, well, you know, you can get young women over with this program or old men with this program, and really all you care about is 15%. You're not, the research isn't there to get you, to kind of pinpoint them with the programming that you want. So because we had these fantastic, analytical capabilities and the people who ran that, we're basically able to kind of, create our own system of ratings as to where we thought that small group of people was, and where the best kind of bang for our dollar was, along the dial. And that's why when you saw the evening news, people would call us up and say, there's 6 of the other guy's ads for every one of yours. If you could hang on until prime time, it started evening out. And if you went over to the cable dial, it was probably, flipped on its head, because we kind of found that way of looking for where that little 15% was watching.
Well, and I also think your voters and our voters weren't always the same. Right. And so, when we would look at the analytics, cable does provide a opportunity to target that wasn't there, and it's incredibly helpful. And like I said, the analytics that you can obtain and apply or make it much more strategic. But we're also going after different voters. So we'd get phone calls saying, why are, the Obama campaign had, 6 ads on the football game. And we're like, that's great. We're doing really well with men. We know women watch football, and we're getting them in these other smaller universes where we weren't seeing your ads. So, I think that both campaigns use this pretty efficiently.
I think what we've heard here is that all consultants are really eager to hear from the supporters on their television. I just, first of all, let me just say a couple of things about the programming. If you want to further discuss the ad with the gentleman from the plant and his wife, we have a Super PAC discussion that's going to take place on Thursday night. Is that at the Quad Club? At the Quad Club. And Saul Shore, who was the chief producer for Priorities USA, ran that ad, will be there. Stephen Law from Crossroads. Who's coming from Restore Our Future? Gentleman from Charlie Speeds from Restore Our Future. So it'll be a really good discussion. I think that this is a great preparation for that. Tomorrow night, Kevin Madden, Stephanie Cutter, Ben LeBolt, you've seen them on TV. They'll be right here with us at the Quad Club as well for a discussion of the earned media campaign. And I think it's really important to note that as powerful and as important as television ads are in a presidential race, what happens on a data moment to moment in the way it's covered is very powerful. And so in certain ways, ads, as important as they are, aren't as important in a presidential race as they are in some other races where people are getting a lot of their information. So please come to those 2 events. And I must say, I'm really grateful to all of my colleagues here. The 2 guys who I've spent a lot of snowy evenings with these guys over the last 6 years working on these Obama campaigns. And they're magnificent colleagues. And I'm so happy to get to know Ashley. We don't get to meet that much when we're running against each other.
That's true.
So this has been a great pleasure for us. And she has done yeoman service because her 2 partners, for good reason, weren't able to get here.
She didn't need them.
She carried I think we're beginning to see who carried the load here in that campaign. But we're really grateful to you and Jim Rutenberg. And by the way, after this event, those of you who are interested, there'll be a steel cage match between Jim Margolis and Jim Rutenberg backstage. But we thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.